Before we get started, go ahead and give that subscribe button a little tap for me. It'll be our secret. Cuba. Come for the rum and cigars, stay for the rich history, local culture, and beautiful white sand beaches. What if I told you I could offer you an all-expenses-paid trip to this beautiful country? All you have to do is not ask any questions. Now, there's a lot to go over here, but first let's look at a quick history. In 1903, the Spanish-American War ends and the Cuban-American Treaty is signed, granting the United States jurisdiction over the southern portion of Guantanamo Bay to use as a naval base. The United States considers this a lease, so much so that they pay rent to the Cuban government every year. The Cuban government considers it a treaty signed at gunpoint and every year refuses to cash the check. What else we got? At one point in the 90s, it was used as a processing center for Haitian asylum seekers, and that went super well. But for the most part, it was just one of hundreds of military bases that the US has all over the world. That is, of course, until September 11th, 2001. And you don't need me to tell you what happens next.
It is now my honor to sign into law the USA Patriot Act.
While the Bush administration and its supporters had taken an especially aggressive stance against enemy combatants, it was inevitable that they would need a place to house prisoners of war. So in 2002, President Bush established Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp to hold individuals the US government viewed as extraordinarily dangerous or who couldn't be held in their original countries. And admittedly, some of them were, but once these men got here, it very quickly became apparent that a lot of them were not hardened terrorists and criminals. The majority of the 779 men brought to Guantanamo had been released without charge. But the first prisoners arrived in 2002, and releases didn't even begin until 2004. Some prisoners have been there for over a decade and counting. And I'll spare you the extensive and continuous reports of abuse and torture that have been coming out of that place since it opened. I'll just let you know, this was not a fun beach getaway. Now, some people might say, okay, if they were really so innocent, how did they end up there in the first place? I mean, it's not like you just go around falsely accusing people of terrorism. What would anyone have to gain from that? During the war, the US military airdropped thousands of leaflets around Afghanistan, offering bounties of up to $25,000 for anyone who could turn in members of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. And remind you, this is a country where the per capita income at the time was about $300 per year. Unshockingly, this was extremely effective, to the point that 86% of the men detained at Guantanamo were turned over by non-American forces in response to these offers. But it was very quickly becoming clear to people working on multiple levels within this system that a lot of these people were essentially random nobodies who'd been sold to the United States. But if so many of these men weren't actually terrorists, why did it take so long to figure that out? In the United States, if you're arrested, you have the right to have your case heard before a judge. And the Sixth Amendment specifically outlines your right to a jury trial of your peers. The Bush administration spent years trying to keep these men out of the United States judicial system. They labeled all prisoners as enemy fighters, even if there was evidence to the contrary, and also claimed that the Geneva Convention didn't apply to them because they were enemy fighters. While that was going on, a federal judge had just ruled that aliens in Cuba had no right to access the US courts to argue against their detainment, even if the person detaining them was the United States. And listen, I hate to bring it up again, but basically the entire time this was happening, these men were being subjected to basically every type of torture you can do to a person in the modern age. Multiple prosecutors had even refused to try specific cases because how clearly and obviously all of the confessions had been tortured out of the people involved. And when they finally did start releasing people, not only did they not want the convicted on American soil, they didn't want the innocent people they'd kidnapped either.
Did it, Patrick! We
Stopped terrorism.
just think what might have happened if we didn't tell everyone about the monster!
Like 22 Uyghur men who spent upwards of 8 years in Guantanamo, despite it being known as early as 2003 that none of them had ever been involved with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. But if they can't stay here, and they can't stay here, and you definitely can't send the innocent ones to either of these places, where do you put them? Well, the US's decision was basically to just beg other countries to accept a few of them for us. Because believe it or not, kidnapping a bunch of maybe terrorists and imprisoning them for years on a foreign military base can create some logistical problems. But in 2009, on his third day in office, President Barack Obama signed an executive order ordering the closure of Guantanamo Bay by the end of the year. And as we know, it totally worked.
Thanks, Obama.
And then, after Obama, we had this guy.
Right, Guantanamo Bay, which by the way, we are keeping open. And we're going to load it up with some bad dudes, believe me, we're going to load it up.
But in the end, that turned out to be one more thing he said but didn't do, releasing one prisoner in 4 years. And now we're here. I feel like if there was ever a time to take a good hard look at all of our more recent foreign policy failures, it'd be now. After 20 years, the US war in Afghanistan has finally ended, but Afghanistan isn't the beginning and end of our military action overseas, not by a long shot. If we want to prevent the creation of new forever wars, we need to address the institutions that allowed places like Guantanamo to exist. There's a real chance we won't see Guantanamo closed by 2024. But what were the odds that we'd see this? And if it is possible, why aren't we doing more? Thank you for watching, and before we go, I want to give out a big thanks to James!
And Sky Bunny.
My #1 patron! You're a true patriot and an American hero. If you want to be as cool as James,
And Sky Bunny.
you can come support me on Patreon, or you can give me a follow over at Garrett Barrett on Twitter. Go ahead, also remember to like and subscribe, so that way you'll get notified for all my new videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and close Guantanamo. Alright, bye.